The first truck arrived before sunrise. No headlights. No noise except the low growl of an exhausted engine crawling through the cold German fog. The workers standing near the orchard did not speak, as it stopped beside the loading station. They simply watched the back doors open, and saw thousands of kilograms of ruined fruit collapsing onto the wet ground like bodies after a battlefield retreat. Apples split open from unexpected frost. Strawberries blackened overnight. Entire harvests destroyed in silence. And standing in the middle of that devastation was a woman named Lena Hartmann, gripping a clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white while Europe waited for shipments that might never come. Like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more stories. The camera would slowly rise above the valley of southern Germany, where endless rows of apple trees stretched across the hills like military formations waiting for inspection. Thin morning mist floated over the orchards. Every leaf carried droplets of frozen rain. In the distance, church bells echoed through small villages still asleep beneath pale blue skies. But the farms were already awake. Germany's fruit industry never sleeps during harvest season. By 4 a.m., engines roar across the countryside. Workers move through muddy rows carrying crates heavier than they look. Refrigerated trucks line up beside packing stations. Forklifts scream through narrow warehouse corridors. And every minute matters, because millions of people across Europe depend on these farms more than they realize. Lena Hartmann knew that pressure better than anyone. At 38 years old, she managed one of the largest fruit farms near Lake Constance, close to the border of Austria and Switzerland. Her father built the business after the Cold War with only 6 hectares of land and a broken tractor purchased from a bankrupt farmer. Now the Hartmann orchard supplied supermarkets across Germany, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But success came with a price. The camera would follow Lena walking alone through the orchard before dawn, boots sinking into soaked soil while freezing wind pushed against her heavy jacket. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had not truly rested in years. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, dirt beneath her fingernails, tiny cuts across her hands from handling damaged branches. This was not the romantic countryside people imagined from postcards. This was survival. Every season felt like war against weather, debt, insects, fuel prices, labor shortages, and time itself. And this year, the enemy was winning. 3 weeks earlier, Germany had experienced one of the worst late frosts in recent agricultural memory. Temperatures dropped below freezing during peak flowering season. Entire orchards across Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg suffered catastrophic damage overnight. The blossoms never had a chance. Lena remembered standing outside at 2 in the morning when the temperature alarms began screaming through the farmhouse. She ran into the fields wearing only thermal clothes beneath a raincoat, while emergency frost control machines blasted warm air across the orchard. But nature did not care. The camera would pan slowly across rows of frozen blossoms glowing under artificial lights, while icy wind tore through the valley like invisible knives. Workers lit anti-frost candles between trees, their small flames flickering helplessly against the darkness. It still wasn't enough. By sunrise, thousands of flowers had died. And every dead flower meant fruit that would never grow. That morning, Lena stood beside her father outside the storage barns. He said nothing for almost a minute. Then quietly, without looking at her, he whispered something she had never heard from him before. "We may not recover this year." For Lena, those words hit harder than the frost itself. Her father survived recessions, floods, international price collapses, and decades of brutal harvest seasons. He was the kind of man who repaired machinery with bleeding hands and considered pain part of the job. Hearing fear in his voice felt unnatural, almost terrifying. But the farm could not stop. Europe still needed fruit. The camera would transition toward massive sorting facilities, where conveyor belts carried endless rivers of apples beneath bright industrial lights. Machines scanned every piece of fruit for color, weight, and imperfections with almost surgical precision. A single damaged apple could ruin entire export shipments. Every crate had standards. Every shipment had deadlines. And Lena carried those deadlines like stones on her shoulders. The pressure became worse when seasonal workers started arriving from Eastern Europe. Hundreds came every year during harvest season, people from Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, and Ukraine living temporarily inside crowded worker housing beside the orchards. Some arrived hopeful. Others arrived desperate. Most simply wanted enough money to survive another winter back home. Lena knew many of them personally, because she grew up beside them. As a child, she used to carry sandwiches to workers during harvest. Now she managed payrolls, housing schedules, medical emergencies, and conflicts inside exhausted crews working 12-hour shifts. One evening, after 14 straight hours in the fields, a young Ukrainian worker collapsed beside the loading station from dehydration and exhaustion. The camera would shake slightly as workers rushed toward him while forklifts stopped moving across the warehouse floor. Lena knelt beside him in the dirt. Her gloves were covered in mud and apple juice, as she held a bottle of water against his lips. Around her, engines continued running. Orders continued shipping. Deadlines continued approaching. Because agriculture does not pause for human weakness. Not even for fear. That night, Lena sat alone inside the farmhouse kitchen staring at invoices spread across the table. Electricity prices had doubled. Fuel costs kept rising. Insurance companies refused to fully cover frost damage. Supermarket chains demanded lower prices while expecting perfect fruit. Outside the window, rain hammered against the glass. And somewhere beyond the darkness, thousands of trees waited silently in the storm. The camera would slowly move toward an old framed photograph hanging near the kitchen doorway. It showed Lena as a little girl standing beside her mother during apple harvest 25 years earlier. Both were smiling. Both covered in dirt. Her mother died from cancer when Lena was 19. Since then, the farm became more than business. It became memory. Responsibility. Inheritance. The last living piece of her family's history. That was why she refused to quit even when the numbers stopped making sense. The next morning began before dawn again. Workers climbed ladders beneath grey skies, while giant crates rolled between orchard rows. Rainwater dripped from leaves onto jackets already soaked from previous storms. Germany's fruit farms look beautiful from a distance. Up close, they look exhausting. The camera would track slowly beside Lena, as she inspected apples by hand, cutting open damaged fruit with a pocket knife while discussing export quality with supervisors through radio static. Her voice remained calm, but exhaustion hid beneath every sentence. Then came the call that changed everything. One of the largest supermarket distributors in Western Europe was cancelling part of their seasonal contract. Too much damaged fruit. Too much uncertainty. They would purchase cheaper imports from elsewhere. For a moment, Lena said nothing. The warehouse noise around her suddenly felt distant. Conveyor belts continued moving. Workers shouted across loading docks. Machines scanned fruit beneath bright lights. But all she heard was the sound of collapsing numbers inside her mind. Without that contract, layoffs would begin within weeks. The camera would focus tightly on Lena's face, as she walked out of the warehouse into cold afternoon rain. Her breathing became uneven. She leaned against a tractor, and closed her eyes while water rolled down her hair. For the first time in years, she looked defeated. But defeat was a luxury harvest season could not afford. So she wiped rain from her face and walked back inside. Because trucks were still arriving. Orders still needed packing. And somewhere across Europe, families would wake tomorrow morning expecting fresh fruit on supermarket shelves, without ever knowing the battle required to place it there. Days passed. Then weeks. The harvest intensified. The camera would sweep across Germany's countryside, where orchards glowed gold beneath autumn sunsets. Thousands of workers moved through fields like coordinated infantry units. Tractors carved muddy paths between endless rows of trees while refrigerated containers departed toward cities across Europe. Hamburg, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. Every shipment carried pieces of farms like Lena's. But the pressure inside her team kept building. One worker sliced his hand badly during night loading operations. Another threatened to leave over unpaid overtime disputes from a subcontractor. Storm forecasts predicted more freezing rain within days. And still the harvest continued. One night, near midnight, Lena walked alone through the cold storage warehouse checking shipment temperatures manually. The giant refrigerated rooms humped like aircraft engines. Towers of apple crates stretched toward ceilings disappearing into darkness. That was when she heard crying. Soft at first, almost hidden beneath machinery. The camera would follow her footsteps deeper into the storage corridor, until she found one of the youngest workers sitting behind stacked crates, face buried in his hands. He was 19. Far from home. Terrified his family back in Ukraine would lose their apartment if he failed to send money this month. Lena sat beside him on the cold concrete floor without speaking. For several seconds, neither moved. Then quietly, she told him something her mother once told her during difficult harvest seasons. Fruit farms teach you one thing very quickly: survival is never gentle. The young worker laughed weakly through tears. And for a moment, beneath freezing warehouse lights, two exhausted strangers shared silence that felt more human than anything else during that brutal season. But outside those warehouse walls, another disaster was already approaching. Because weather satellites were now tracking the largest storm system Germany's southern farms had seen in nearly a decade. And directly in its path stood Lena's orchards. The camera would slowly rise above the valley again. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains like advancing armies. Wind bent entire rows of trees sideways. Workers stared nervously toward the horizon while emergency radios crackled with storm warnings. Then Lena received the message every farmer fears hearing during harvest. Hail expected within hours. And if the forecast proved correct, everything they fought to save could disappear before morning. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. At first, it sounded like distant artillery somewhere beyond the mountains. A low rumble rolling across southern Germany, while the last evening light disappeared behind thick black clouds. Workers stopped moving between the orchard rows. Forklifts froze beside half-loaded trailers. Even the birds vanished from the valley, as if nature itself understood what was coming. Then the wind hit. The camera would shake slightly as massive gusts tore through the orchards, bending apple trees violently while loose plastic sheets ripped from storage tunnels and vanished into the darkening sky. Rain exploded across the valley sideways, slamming against tractors and warehouse walls hard enough to sound like gravel. And standing in the center of it all was Lena Hartmann. Her radio screamed with overlapping voices. Section 4 needs covering. Storage gate damaged. Workers still in the north rows. Hail incoming. She turned toward the horizon. White flashes of lightning revealed the storm moving over the mountains like a living wall. The kind of storm farmers remember for decades. The kind that destroys entire seasons in less than 15 minutes. The camera would follow Lena sprinting through muddy orchard lanes while rain soaked her clothes instantly. Her boots slipped through deep water as workers rushed beside her carrying emergency netting and protective covers. No one shouted in panic. That was the strange thing about agricultural disasters. Real fear often arrives quietly. People simply move faster. Because every second matters. The first hailstones struck moments later. Small at first. Then larger. Hard enough to crack against metal rooftops like gunfire. Workers ducked beneath tractors while the storm intensified with terrifying speed. The camera would cut between close shots of apples exploding apart under impact, and wide cinematic views of entire orchards disappearing beneath sheets of ice and rain. Within minutes, chaos swallowed the farm. Branches snapped violently. Protective nets collapsed. Crates overturned in the mud. Lena grabbed two workers pulling emergency tarps across exposed fruit bins, when a sudden blast of wind ripped the fabric from their hands and launched it into darkness. One of the younger workers nearly fell beneath moving machinery before Lena caught his jacket and dragged him backward. Rainwater poured down her face. Her breathing became ragged. But she kept moving. Because leaders do not stop during storms. Not when others are watching them. The camera would track her through the loading station, where workers fought desperately to save packaged shipments before floodwater reached the storage bays. Forklifts splashed through rising water carrying pallets toward higher ground while alarms echoed across the facility. Then came the sound no farmer ever forgets. The greenhouse glass shattered. Hundreds of panels exploded inward beneath baseball-sized hailstones, sending workers scrambling for cover while icy rain flooded the nursery structures. Thousands of young strawberry plants, weeks away from maturity, were destroyed in minutes. Lena stood frozen for 1 second. Only one. Then she ran toward the greenhouse. The camera would slow as she pushed through broken glass and freezing rain searching for trapped workers beneath collapsed metal frames. Emergency lights flickered red through the storm while water rushed across the concrete floor. That was when she found Sophia, one of the Romanian workers. 26 years old. Pinned beneath fallen support beams. Blood mixed with rainwater across the floor, while other workers struggled to lift twisted metal away from her leg. Lena dropped beside them instantly, ignoring broken glass slicing through her gloves. "Lift together," she shouted. The storm drowned half her words. But they understood. 3 workers pulled upward while Lena dragged Sophia free from the wreckage inch by inch. Sophia screamed once, then bit her lip hard enough to bleed rather than cry again. Outside, sirens finally approached through the storm. But emergency vehicles could barely reach the valley roads because fallen trees blocked several routes. So the workers carried Sophia themselves.
The past is never lost.
The camera
Tina.
would follow
It
them
lives
through
here.
torrential rain, as lightning illuminated exhausted faces covered in mud, sweat, and blood. It looked less like a fruit farm now, and more like survivors escaping a battlefield. Hours passed before the storm finally weakened. When silence returned, it felt unnatural. Almost frightening. The orchards looked devastated. Thousands of apples covered the ground like shattered glass beneath